Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. Well, the reviews for the Captain Marvel movie are out, and a lot of people who are being critical of it are saying that it is simply boring, or it's agenda driven, or it seems rushed, like Marvel wasn't prepared to actually put this movie out at this time. And while I think that all of those things are true, I think that all of those things are simply magnifying a greater problem, a singular problem, which is at the heart of all of these different complaints about the movie. And that singular problem is the character of Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel herself. Because if you have people who don't know anything about the comics and don't know anything really about the character or the history of the character, then it's perfectly logical for them to simply make those complaints and leave it there and say it's a problem with Disney and its production of this movie so fast. It's a problem with an agenda set into this movie. It's a problem with the acting on Brie Larson's part. It's a problem simply of being a boring script because of any and all of those things that I just mentioned. But as people who actually have some knowledge of the comics and some knowledge of the creation of this character, which I would say that a lot of my audience, the people who are listening to this, would have knowledge of those things, I think it's something that we really should point out, that the problem with this movie, the heart of the problem with this movie, is the character itself. Because when you have people who don't understand that history and make those complaints about this movie, they will stop short and say, well, this is the problem with the movie. They can simply fix it and make a better movie next time. But if the problem is the character itself, and there are many more characters like this currently in the Marvel Universe, then this problem will creep up again and again in the MCU. And so I would say that it is very important to talk about the problems with the character itself and how that is the origin point of all of these other problems. So to begin with, I want to take a step back and look at the difference between this character and the other characters in the MCU and their origins. Because they all get their origins from Marvel Comics. And I'm sure most people would probably think that since Carol Danvers has been around in one form or another for at least 50 years, then there should be no problem with this character. But that's an incorrect assumption, because there are two different kinds of characters now within the Marvel Universe. And the origin point of the difference between these kinds of characters is Captain Marvel's creation itself in 2012. This was the origin point, I would say, of the new characters for Marvel. Now, I did a video just last week or 2 weeks ago that went over a podcast that was put out by the three main creators of Captain Marvel in 2012. Those three people would be Stephen Wacker, who was the editorial driving force behind this character of Captain Marvel. You have Kelly Sue DeConnick, who was the writer of this character, and you have Sana Amanat, who took over editorial duties from Stephen Wacker and kept on putting this character out there time and time again, even though the character kept failing in comic form. So these three people, when talking about the creation of Captain Marvel from 2012 forward, they freely admit that this is basically a brand new character. Now, they never come out and say that straight away. They always talk about honoring the history of Carol Danvers, but they clearly said that her name was problematic and therefore they had to change it. Her costume was problematic, therefore they had to change it. Her history was massively problematic, therefore they basically ignore it. Her personality was problematic and they had to change it. So if you change all of those things, if you change the character's name, if you change the character's costume, if you ignore all of the 40 years of history prior to that point, and you change the personality of the character, that is a new character, pure and simple. And we know from the words of Kevin Feige himself that the Captain Marvel that you see on the screen in the Captain Marvel movie is solely based upon Captain Marvel from 2012 onwards. So the thing is that, as I said, this is the origin point of the what I would call new characters that Marvel is putting out. Prior to that, Marvel made characters which were very, very different. Prior to that, Marvel was a company that put out stories that were ultimately character-driven. And being character-driven, those characters had a very unique way of being created and actually being fleshed out. And their very unique way of this was to make their characters, as they always say at Marvel, the world outside your window. Now, the people at Marvel Comics right now, they use that phrase a lot, and they use it and butcher it because they really don't understand what that means. They simply think that because you have the same cities in the Marvel Universe, that it looks exactly like our universe, and therefore that's the world outside your window. And they would further go on to say that because all of these people in the Marvel Universe have problems just like we have in our universe, then they are just normal people. But the problem is that you have all of these people over at Marvel, and they think that all of these problems that normal people have are agenda-driven problems, when really these problems only affect about 2% of the population, and so they're making characters that only represent about 2% of the population in the real world, whereas in the Marvel world they represent 50 to 60% of the population, and that's not the world outside your window. So originally, I would say what was meant by the world outside your window was that Marvel had characters that were built to look like real human beings. They were flawed, multi-dimensional, all warts included, nitty-gritty characters, and they were the best reflection of human beings that could be put down on a page. And that's what made Marvel characters great, and that's how they reflected the world outside your window, because these people were indeed a very good reflection of actual human beings, and the fact that they were human beings in a setting that is exactly the same as our setting of geography, well, that just magnified the point that they were real-life human beings when you're reading the story. And when you look at all of the older characters that are being used in the MCU now, from Spider-Man to Captain America to Black Widow and Hawkeye, and all of these characters that have been around for 40 or 50 years or more, they were set up and built their great stories upon this way of storytelling, upon this character-driven storytelling. And that's how Marvel became great with its storytelling. Now, quickly, this would be opposed to something like DC. With Batman and Superman, they have a much more mythological way of telling a story. And Superman is like a godlike character. Even Batman is sort of like a trickster godlike character. You know, they are almost mythological types of characters. But Marvel built it upon nitty-gritty human being characters. And that's why the characters up until this point in the MCU have been good, relatable characters, because they were drawing on the stories from the old character-driven Marvel that was previously in the comics and replaced, beginning with Captain Marvel in 2012. So, what do the characters from 2012, starting with Captain Marvel onward, look like? Well, I would say look at Captain Marvel herself and you will be able to see this very easily. Because you have those three creators, Stephen Wacker, Kelly Sue DeConnick, and Sana Amanat. Now, each of these three creators have stated in their own way that comics, and comic book characters specifically, are there to push an agenda, to sell ideas to people. Stephen Wacker says it in his description of these characters, when he talks about Captain Marvel not just being Earth's mightiest female hero, but Earth's mightiest hero. You can see that he has a female agenda with this character. And you have Kelly Sue DeConnick, who was the writer, talking about the fact that if you have a platform like this and don't use it to say something progressive, then you are wasting your opportunity to actually create something. You have Sana Amanat saying that characters are quite specifically for pushing ideas. So you have these people that create characters now at Marvel, just like this. And the whole point is that characters now are simply ideas in a mask. I've said this a number of times. And this mask is not their superhero mask. It is the fact that these are simply ideas or agendas wrapped in the mask of being a character itself. And so these characters are not actual representations of human beings. They are representations of ideas. And the point is, with this kind of storytelling, well, it's escapism. You have superpowered beings. And when people look at this, what they are looking at is escapism. And so they want to actually read or watch something that allows them to engage with that escapism. And they're able to do that when characters are actual representations of human beings, because it's easily accessible to them. But when you take characters and simply make them ideas in the mask of being characters, well, then what happens with the storytelling? Well, the storytelling becomes a lesson for you to learn. And those quote-unquote characters, again, are ideas that you are supposed to learn through the lesson of reading this book or watching this movie. And when it becomes work for the audience, that is the exact opposite of what the audience came there for, which was escapism. So, to go back for a second and look at the Captain Marvel movie itself. When you look at things like Brie Larson's acting, is it bad? Is it wooden? I would say yes. But it is significantly magnified by the fact that she's playing a character that is a bad character. She is playing a character that is a wooden character, a character that has never been fleshed out, a character that is not actually supposed to look like a human being, but is supposed to simply be an idea in a mask. And if you look at the story itself of the movie and say, it's ideologically driven, it has an agenda. Well, yes it does. But again, that is significantly magnified by the fact that this character was created specifically not just to have an agenda, but to be an agenda, rather than to be a character that was an actual person. And does the movie look like it's rushed and that the story is not well fleshed out? Well, yes, but again, that is significantly magnified by the fact that they're working off of source material that was never fleshed out, that never had good stories, because, again, it was specifically constructed just to sell ideas to an audience. And so, as I said, I think we should point out these facts, because you have people like Brie Larson talking about the fact that she wants the next Captain Marvel movie to include Miss Marvel, or she wants an Avengers movie that's all female. And you have people talking about, well, Hawkeye's about to retire, so why don't they introduce Kate Bishop Hawkeye, which is the current Hawkeye, and all of these other female characters for something like a female-led Avengers movie. And all of these characters that they are talking about putting in this new phase of the MCU, these are all new characters. Whereas Carol Danvers, as Captain Marvel, she did actually have a history in the Marvel Universe for 40 years before that 2012 point. Now, they ignored all of that history, but she actually had a history, and there is something that does tie her to the rest of the Marvel Universe, and to those other characters, who are great characters, characters that were created as reflections of human beings, and so at the very least, there is that connection there between Captain Marvel and those older characters. But these newer characters that were created after 2012, they are purely and simply ideas in a mask. There is no bones about it, and they have no connection whatsoever with that old way of actually telling a story. You have characters like Kamala Khan, Miss Marvel, who was specifically created and written, as the writer says, to not look like any of those old characters. Quite specifically. And of course, one of those creators of Kamala Khan, Miss Marvel, is Sana Amanat, who said straight out that characters are for pushing ideas. And you have all of the other characters like Kate Bishop's Hawkeye and the new female Vision. These are all characters that push an agenda in one form or another. Kate Bishop's Hawkeye is a radical feminist Mary Sue character who can only gain power by putting down her male counterpart in every chance that she gets. And so none of these characters, none of these new characters are actually good characters. And since they are not good characters in that Marvel vein, they don't have any great stories like all of those great stories like Infinity Gauntlet that we have been witnessing in the MCU up until this point. And if you drag those characters into the MCU, you will simply be dragging the problem of ideas in a mask into the MCU, and you will have no connection to those old characters, and you will have no great stories to draw upon, and it will simply become, like this Captain Marvel movie, an agenda-driven movie that becomes more of a lecture than actually escapism, which is what you go to the movies for to begin with. So, hopefully I've given you something new to think about. If I did, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. And if you could, share this video. That would be great, because we know straight up now that videos like this about Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel, Brie Larson are being shoved in the corner by YouTube so that they do not affect the Captain Marvel movie. Alright, I'll see you later. Bye.